church that was birthed by his death and resurrection should be about. But how do we connect these instructions to go and make disciples? How do we connect these instructions to the everyday life that you and I live? The things that we do, our practices, the even just coming and going to church. How do we connect those instructions? How do we connect the life of the believer and the corporate life of the church to these words? And to be honest, when I look around at churches and I think about my own experience growing up in church, it seems like what we do most of the time is we come up with a set of activities and programs and we throw it all against the wall, and we really hope that something sticks, and that thing that we hope sticks is that somehow, some way, people end up looking a little bit more like Jesus, right? And what tends to happen, and I'm not saying this is every church experience, I'm just saying as a whole, this feels kind of like the way that it often looks. What tends to happen is that people participate in these activities, all these things that we say, here's church, now go and do this. They will do the things that we ask them to do, but they begin to be frustrated. And their frustration is that their lives don't really seem to be conforming to the image of Jesus. They're doing all of the things, but they're not necessarily looking any more like Jesus than when they began. And churches tend to respond in one of two ways to that problem. The first is we go, you know what, maybe we've asked too much. Maybe righteousness, holiness, Christ-likeness, the bar is just too high. And so we will exchange that standard for a different standard. And we'll just tell people, it's okay, you don't really have to look more like Jesus. Just come to all the things that we're doing, smile and give, and that will be enough. Just be a happy church member. So one of the ways we sometimes do things is we lower the bar. The other thing that we typically try to do is, if this isn't working, let's upgrade. Let's reinvent, let's modernize, let's figure out what culture is doing, let's adapt, let's shift, let's add bells and whistles to all of the different things that we're doing. And maybe if we'll just make this fancy enough, then they'll start to look a little bit more like Jesus. Not this church, but other churches. But what happens is that both parties, church leadership and the congregation, end up just staying frustrated. And sometimes that gets really ugly. Sometimes they get frustrated with each other and it starts to get tense in the room. The biggest tragedy of all of that, though, is that you've got a room full of people confessing Christ as Lord and yet not looking like him at all in their day-to-day life, not growing in him at all in their day-to-day life. And I just want to tell you that problem, that tension, it's not unique here or anywhere else. This has been what the church has been wrestling through and working out since its inception. But that problem keeps me up at night. It's a deep conviction in my heart. I just in becoming a pastor in these last few years, if someone were to read those words of Jesus and then they were to come up to me and they were to say, okay, I want to take that command seriously. How do I do this here? What would I say? What would I say to somebody that said, I want that to look like my life. I want to go and make disciples. How do I do that here in your church? What would I say? What would you say? More than that, the people that are already here, you, that come faithfully week in and week out and do the things that we're doing. Do we know why? Why are we here for Sunday school? Why do we come on some Wednesday nights, wink? Why do we have conferences, and why do we do these groups, and why do we have Mission Knack, and why do we know? Or are we just kind of going through the motions? And that question, that tension, all of that it just burdens me. I think about it all the time. So over the last 2.5 years or so, what we've been doing, our staff and our elders, and many of you, whether you realized it or not, have been participating in a process where we're really trying to wrestle through the answers to those questions. And so as we move through the next several weeks, what I'm going to be doing is over the next 5 weeks, I'm going to be sharing with you what we're going to just overall call the vision of this church. Some of you are like, this sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, those of you that were here a few weeks ago, we had a fantastic turnout of our members and leaders where we shared some of this. And I'm going to now go really slowly through it and break every ounce of this down. And some of you are going to be sitting in here maybe today and you're going to go, well, I already knew all of that. Good. That's really good news. I'm so excited. But I want to just tell you, I think that there's going to be other things that we're going to have to stretch a little bit, that we're maybe going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to, in all of this, we're going to have to talk and pray together. We're going to have to share our fears and our concerns. What do we do here and what do we do there, while at the same time maintaining a bond of unity. This is going to be a process. And I'm going to try and outline as best I can over the next 5 weeks what this all looks like. And here's what it's how it's going to kind of play out. We met with membership and our leaders a few weeks ago, and we had a fantastic night. If you were here, I just want to again say thank you for being here. You had so many good questions and feedback, and I'll be honest, some of the questions I wouldn't have seen coming in a million years, but that's why you asked them, and they were so good, and it's made me think outside the box and understand things in a different way. And so what I want to do is take all of that, and we're going to preach through it over the next 5 weeks, and then I'm going to go on a Sunday school tour, which is going to be fun. I'm going to come to every single Sunday school class and spend an hour with you, and we're going to wrestle through it together. If you're not in Sunday school, hashtag Sunday school, but we're going to really get into the nuts and bolts of this together. The goal, though, at the end is going to be really, really, really clear. What I hope happens is that we ground these words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 28 to our everyday life and practice here in Nacogdoches. In 2022, as a member of Fredonia Hill, or even as a visitor, like, what does it look like for us right here to take this seriously? And how do we talk about it? And how do we bring others along in it? And so we're going to start today with two things. We're going to start today with what's called vision. And vision is just really simply, where do you want to go? Now, this is a little different in a church. Don't go corporate on me. This is a little different in a church. Vision for a church is not about necessarily something we want to do or accomplish. Vision for us is going to be answering the question of who do we want to be? Collectively, as a community, as a people, who is it that we want to be? Not on our own terms, what do we just want to be, but who are we commanded to be? And then the second part of that is strategy. And all strategy is if this is who you want to be, then how do you get there? And the answer to the question, how do you get there, is what forms your strategy. So we're going to try to work through that today as this is the beginning. Now I want to go back to Matthew chapter 28. And I want to go to verse 18 through 20. Again, this is the Great Commission. And I want to just give you a few points. I've preached through it. You can go back to those podcasts back in 2019 and you can work through it in detail. But I just want to remind you of a few highlights. And the first is that it begins with Jesus announcing his authority. That he is the Son of God and he has the authority to send his disciples on mission. Who's he talking to in this context? Well, he's talking to, I just said it, he's talking to his disciples. That's a word we hear a lot in the church, but one I'm not sure we really understand what it means. He's talking to his students. He's talking to those who he has called and said, follow me. I'm going to teach you what it looks like to live in the kingdom that I have brought. That's what he's been doing with his disciples from the very, very, very beginning. They've been his students. He has been their rabbi, which means teacher. And so Jesus has the authority to send his students. And his students are being sent with an invitation to who? Well, now the kingdom is wide open. His students are being sent to all the nations of the world, all people with an invitation to join the Messiah's family and to be a student of Jesus. That's my phrasing of it. He says, baptize them into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. So you see there, he's saying to his students, go and invite others to come into this family through faith in Jesus, and so that they can learn from me the very same things that you have learned from me. And he says, by the way, this is going to be hard. You are not going to be able to do this with your own creativity, your own ingenuity. I am sending you with my personal presence. I am with you always to the end of the age. This is a task that if Jesus' students are going to walk in, they must be surrendered to the personal presence of Jesus in them, the power of the Holy Spirit. So it's from that text that we understand our vision. Again, what is the answer to that question? It's who do we want to be? And here's what it is very simply from that text. We want to be a church, this group right here, where all people can discover and follow Jesus. We want to be the people that are bringing that invitation to all people, that invitation to know him and be part of the family. And we want them to be able to do that right where they are. Regardless of their life circumstances, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what they're doing right now, we want to bring that invitation to know Jesus and follow him right where they are and wherever they're sent. Because how many of you know that when God gets a hold of your life, there's a process of sending? He never saves us just for individual personal fun. He rescues us because we are part of the larger framework of the rescue of all creation. And so when he gets a hold of you, he sends you out into the world with the message of the good news. So that's our vision. Shocker, right? This is the part where hopefully many of you are going, okay, I'm digging that. I know that. If we were to really understand this statement, what it is it's about what kind of people are we going to be? What kind of community are we going to be? If we're going to be a church where all people can discover and follow Jesus right where they are and wherever they're sent, that's a statement about the type of people that we are. But this is super crucial. That anything that happens in a larger community, anything that happens corporately, has to first happen individually. That we cannot become this kind of church that I'm describing, because everybody wants to sign up for that. That sounds good, doesn't it? To be that kind of church. We cannot become that kind of church without us individually deciding to become a certain kind of people. You with me? That kind of church doesn't happen on accident. It doesn't happen by happenstance or because we put a really cool design of ministry together. That kind of church is only birthed by this group of people becoming a certain kind of people that when they get together reflect that larger reality. So, in a really oversimplified way, the Great Commission is a group of deeply committed students of Jesus who together make up a family. Now, later on, as we see this family grow, this is going to be referred to as an ecclesia or a church. But the lives that these new students of Jesus live individually and the life that they live collectively are woven together so much so that you can't tell the difference between the two. What they are collectively is an expression of who they are individually. And I cannot overstate that. In the kids' bags, there's a cool way of just looking at this. I don't know if you can see it on my hand. There's a little bracelet here. And it's a bracelet that's made out of different threads, different colors of threads. Kids, you just slap those on or put it on your mom or dad, whatever. And this, you can't tell that all you can see that's individual is the different colors here, but the thing is a whole. And it's a good way of picturing and realizing the way that who we are as serious students of Jesus and who we are as a church are woven so tightly together that they're bonded, that they're two parts of the same whole. And so what I want to do, I want to just kind of show you this in a really simple way. And look at the connection between the life being lived and the corporate expression of that life being lived that leads to impact in a community. Because believe it or not, that equation is in this book. I want to go to Acts chapter 2. And as we go there, I'm going to tell you, these are passages that you have probably read before. That's okay. These are passages that are probably very familiar. And I think sometimes we look at these passages and we kind of have this idealistic version of the early church. We're going to talk about the early church and we go, oh, if we could just go back to that, if that was the real, And I think that's a mistake. There's something really, really, really pure that we're going to see here in the early church because they didn't have time to start figuring out all the different issues. They didn't have time to get creative. It was live or die. Like, we're being persecuted. This is an invitation to life. They're responding to Jesus, and they're figuring it out right there in the middle of it. That is not to say at all that the early church didn't have its issues. They are wrought with issues, and you can read it even in the book of Acts. And certainly in Paul's letters to churches. So this isn't an idealistic look, but what I want to show you is I want to show you just a few really, really, really profound yet simple moments where there's a connection between the lives of the individual, how that impacts the church, and then how that impacts the community. And the first is in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And they, next two words, devoted themselves. They devoted themselves. It's a statement about a group doing something individually. The word, that phrase, devoted themselves, literally means to continue steadfastly in something. Steadfastly means continually. You with me? With consistency. So they devoted themselves. And just take that phrase, take that statement that they devoted themselves to something. So the first thing we learn about this little group is that it's made up of a bunch of individuals who are continuing steadfastly in something. What did they devote themselves to? To the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. You see how that devoted themselves, that individual statement, you see how it starts to impact the community? They had all things in common. They were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing to the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, there it is, how often? Day by day, continuing steadfastly, right? You tracking with the routine that's happening here, the description of the individual life, and day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God. And then look, here we go, we start to get outside this group, and what? Having favor with all people. And the Lord, because remember, this isn't something that we do, this is something He does through us. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So look, seriously, we're not doing much, but just looking at kind of the dominoes here. Do you see it? They devoted themselves day by day. These were serious students of Jesus. It doesn't say that they had it all figured out. It doesn't say that there weren't problems. It doesn't say that they didn't have all sorts of sin and shortcoming, because my goodness, they do, and we can read about it. But the point is, they were committed students of Jesus. The next domino that falls is that commitment then impacts the community. They start to act in and of themselves in this community called the church in a way that mirrors the way that they were serious students of Jesus. And then the final domino that falls is that now this community that's living like this together is now starting to break into the community out there. And a great number are added to this family. But it all started with a group of people that took seriously the job of being a student of Jesus. Now, go to Acts chapter 9. Just flip over a few pages. A few things happen. There's a few events that happen here but we're moving fast. We're going to read one verse. Verse 31. So the church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria. You see how this thing started to move? Had peace and was being built up. Can you stop for a second? How many churches does that statement describe that you know of? How many of us would look at church and go, that is the place where there is peace and we're being built up? That's a challenge, isn't it? But it says that the church in those areas, that they had peace and were being built up. Remember, there's something happening in that larger community. What's the key? Look, and walking, the next sentence, and walking in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit, it multiplied. Now, don't miss it. There's one word there that gives us the key. And what? Starts with a W, ends with alking. Okay, I was going to say, you didn't get it from that? Okay. And walking in. What does walking in mean? Living daily in light of, or continuing steadfastly, right? You see it? Or day by day. That's what walking in means. Walking in what? The fear of the Lord. Oh, okay, that's a little harder to, what is that? What is walking in the fear of the Lord? Well, first of all, again, I just want to overemphasize this. Walking in means living in. A description of what I'm walking in is something that I'm doing as a habit, as a normal. And they were walking in as a normal, a day-to-day routine, the fear of the Lord. Well, let's scratch our heads a little bit. What about fear of the Lord? Do you remember Abraham? At the conclusion of Abraham bringing Isaac to the altar, and the angel stops him and says, don't sacrifice Isaac. What does he say? This is so cool. He says, now I see that you fear the Lord. There's that phrase, now I see that you fear the Lord. Why? Because you have not withheld your son, your only son. So the fear of the Lord is associated with not withholding anything from him. Come on, are you with me? We're going to do a little math here, okay? 1 + 1 = 2. They were daily walking in the fear of the Lord. What does that mean? That they were daily living in the context of surrender. Everything is yours, everything is yours, everything is yours. It's no wonder we see passages like Acts 2:42-47 pop up when they start giving things away for the good of others. Why? Because nothing was off limits for God. They were walking in the fear of the Lord, but they were walking in it not as a group of people, but as individuals, and it was manifesting itself in the group. By the way, what happens here? Oh, by the way, they were living in the comfort of the Holy Spirit, and the church did what? It multiplied. Do you see? This is simple math. Simple kingdom math. Serious students of Jesus, living surrendered and being transformed by him, it shows up in the community of people who are also doing the same thing. And when that shows up in a corporate way, it makes a dent, it makes an impact in darkness as they go out and bring light into the community. Are we shocked by this equation? And nowhere in here, not in any of these descriptions, does it say, and this righteous, holy, devout, and perfect group of people really pushed back darkness. The only thing we know about these groups is that they had been rescued by the power and the grace of God in Jesus. They placed their faith in him. They decided to be serious about following him. That's what we know. And shocker, when they got serious about it, it changed them as a group and it impacted and shifted the communities that they were in. This is the equation. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, I want you to jump over there for a quick second. I love this book. I love this letter that Paul writes to the young pastor. It is so good. And he's giving him very practical instructions on pastoring a church. And I want you to see what he says to him. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, he tells him, have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, here's what he says, train yourself. How many of you ever trained for something on accident? No? Training implies what? A focus on an end. If I'm going to train for an Ironman, which let me be clear, I'm not. My training, what I do day to day, is focused on what I want to do or be at the end. So here's what he says to this pastor. He says, train yourself for godliness. How serious does Paul think that Timothy ought to take that training? Rather, how serious does Paul believe that Timothy ought to take godliness? It's everything. Godliness, the character of Christ-likeness, is another way to talk about godliness. Paul says to this young pastor, you better be training in it. You better be focused on it. It better be your entire pursuit. He says bodily training is of some value, but godliness is of value in every way as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. He's basically saying that living in the kingdom requires this kind of training. If you want to live in the kingdom, this is what training looks like. Oh, and by the way, Pastor, this is your main job as it relates to the church. Bring them along in this training as well. That's what, we can summarize 1 Timothy. That's basically what he's saying to him. He's teaching this young pastor to take seriously the command of godliness, because pastors and clergy and leaders are not exempt from this training. Rather, he's saying you better take it seriously yourself, because you're going to be the one that is modeling it for this congregation and leading them along in it. So don't preach what you do not practice, but teach them, train them, and do it from your own lifestyle. So the individual focus of the student of Jesus is what? Training in godliness. You're going, okay, great. Where are we going? Well, let's back up, okay? If we want to be the kind of church that I just described, where all people can discover and follow Jesus right where they are and wherever they're sent, what is the strategy going to be? We're going to have some really awesome programs. We're going to do some fun stuff. You thought Chili Bowl was good. Wait till, right? No. If we want to be that kind of church, then we have to be this kind of people. What kind of people? The kind of people that take seriously the job of training in godliness. The type of people that are serious students of Jesus. So here's our strategy, okay? Here it is, just in simple terms. We're going to focus the whole, W-H-O-L-E, the whole of our lives on apprenticeships. We're going to be students. One-on-one relational students with Jesus, on apprenticeship to Jesus and participation in his family. When COVID hit, I guess this was right when SFA was trying to come back to school, they basically said, okay, there's like 15 options for being a student. You can be online, you can be hybrid online, you can be fully online, you can be a hybrid person and be a part robot and go to, I don't know, there's like all these different ways of going to school, right? You can be whatever. It was like 15 different options. Basically, you want to be a student, you call the shots. I'm not, right? I'm just, sorry. I got SFA love running in my blood, okay? My point is there were a lot of options for being a student. The kingdom doesn't work that way. You begin in Jesus, you're carried on by the Spirit, and you do it in the context of community. There's no online option, okay? There's no non-in-person option. There's no way around doing this together. It's either with us or not at all. You with me? So serious apprenticeship to Jesus, really being his student, requires for me to live my life in the context of this group. Not the church in general, you with names and faces and stories, and me with my name, my face, my story, my baggage, my junk. There's no way around it. You and I have to do this together. Participation in his family is the only way in which we can really be serious students of Jesus. We will not grow lest we participate in the family. You with me? Just as an aside, here's what happens if you try to do that. You get a whole lot of knowledge and no wisdom. You know a lot of answers. You may be really smart in the Greek and the Hebrew. You may have it all figured out. But when life punches you in the mouth, you know what's going to come out? Not character. Come on. It's not going to be the character of Jesus that flows out of you because all you have is stuff up here. Cheap Christian answers with no substance will be what comes out of you, and it will not save you on those days. You with me? We have to do this and take seriously that the only way of doing this is together. And how many of you know we need that word this day and age right now? The church needs to remember the command to be a family. When everything we see is trying to make us a bunch of individuals, we have to put our foot down, say no, and go, this is the only way that it happens is if we are a family. All right, soapbox off. All right. So, notice that in our strategy, there were no programs and events. Did anybody see that? I know that makes us uncomfortable. It makes me a little uncomfortable. Because there's nothing I would love more than it to not be what it is. But it is what it is. It's the hard way. There's no programs and events in the strategy. Here's why that matters. It's not because programs and events aren't important. They are important. Look at me. I just said that. They're important. But church activity undergone without a heart devoted to learn and transform will make no difference in your life or in the life of us as a community of believers. That's what the Pharisees did. Lots of activity, but when Jesus showed up and said, let me show you the way, they said, no thanks, we've got it all figured out, thank you. They refused to become a student. They refused to admit that they were blind. And because they refused to admit that they were blind, Jesus said it in the book of John, that because you say that you see, you are blind. And I want to be clear. The church calendar is jam full of awesome stuff this year. 2022 is full of goodness. I'm not messing with you. It is. In the fall, in the spring, and in the summer, we're gonna get into it on Wednesday nights. We've got 6-week studies planned for the real meat and potatoes of getting into the text and wrestling this out. We're gonna train the kids. We've got a worship workshop that's gonna go alongside that. We've got men's and women's events. We've got conferences. We've got brunches. We've got missions opportunities like this weekend. We've got students meeting every single Wednesday night. They're going out and serving the community. We've got college students that every single week are serving coffee on campus, that they're going on winter retreats and they're going to New York to serve. We got stuff. And you can do it all. But don't mistake activity for intimacy. Don't mistake activity for intimacy. The reason that all that stuff is on the calendar, and we've had to really look ourselves in the eye and go, why is that on the calendar? The reason is because those things are aimed at training in a godly life and giving space for that training to occur together. That's why it's all on the calendar. Not because doing those things in and of themselves is a godly life, because coming into those spaces trains us with one another in godliness. I'm gonna breathe and give you this, okay? I came across this and I really was dumbfounded by it. Barna Group, which is a research group that puts out all sorts of statistics about church, and they released some data. This has been a few years ago. And they said that a large majority, I want you to wrap your head around this. Large majority of adults attending church said that an encounter with God was rare. What? large majority of adults attending church, coming to places like this week in and week out, they said it was rare to encounter God. And at first I was like, gosh, church, what are you doing? I was frustrated by it. I thought, but wait a minute, this isn't making, why? And in light of what I've been digging into and studying, this question dawned on me. What if it's because people come to church and they want to meet God? I'm not saying that's not true. People come to church, but I think who we're coming to look for is a stranger and not a friend. What did Jesus say in John? He said, the sheep know my voice. I'm not saying I'm right. This is a hypothesis, but I'm just saying if we're coming to church week in and week out expecting that Sunday is going to be the place, when I come into this building, Sunday is going to be the place where I'm going to encounter God, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I have nothing to do with Him. There's a Sunday hobby. Well, then I'm walking in this place hoping to hear the voice of a stranger, rather than walking in this place ready to interact with the voice of a friend, of one that I know well, the shepherd of my soul, the one that speaks to me in the still and in the quiet, the one I've walked with on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, the one I've testified to on Friday, the one I've heard a friend testify to on Saturday. That voice I know. And then when I come in here, that voice is familiar. I don't believe, some do, I'm not in this group, I don't believe that God is done speaking in this room. Some have said that God has left the Western church, and I just cannot reconcile that with what I read here. But I'm increasingly concerned that that voice that is speaking to us is more and more and more and more strange to us. And so when we come in a room like this, we don't recognize the voice of our friend that is speaking. Could it be that church has become the place where we come to find God, sort of like we go to the movies to check the entertainment box? Now, I want to be clear. Church should be a place where we experience God's presence. Amen? Where else? It should be. It's not that we're looking in the wrong place. But our experience of God's presence shouldn't be because that's what the church, as if we're some company, produces and manufactures experiences of God's presence. Right? We're not Apple churning out iPhones. Like, here's God's presence. Anybody? Here's God's presence. Sign up. Here's, The experience of God's presence should be in the church because it's a place where people know Him intimately. It's a place where they gather to worship Him. That's why you should experience Him here, because we know Him. And when we get together, we're coming to lift up His name. So that's our vision and our strategy. And it's an odd place to stop, but it is where I am going to conclude this morning. And I want to ask you to stand for our invitation. I like the word invitation. I can't make you do anything. God's not going to make you do anything. I love the word invitation because it is exactly that. The truth is what it is. Are we going to walk in it? Are we going to step into it? And here's, I think, the question for this morning. I think there's probably very few of you, and I would love to set up a meeting with you if this is you. There's probably very few of you that look at that vision and go, nope, that's not godly. That's not scriptural. Like, if that's you, just come outside. I just mean let's. I don't know. So, depends on how you talk. But look at me. Most of us don't disagree. But if that equation is right, if that equation that we walk through is that only happens when each one of us take this thing seriously, when each one of us not become perfect, but when each one of us becomes serious. When we together become serious students of Jesus. And I just want to emphasize that again. Becoming a serious student of Jesus does not mean that you have it all together. It doesn't mean you don't have any sin. It doesn't mean that you don't have tons of questions. That's not it at all. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He talked about a yoke and a burden that was easy. The requirement for receiving that easy yoke was what? Come to me. Becoming a serious student of Jesus is a recognition that I am broke down and unable to live the life that God has called me to live on my own. And so I'm gonna learn from him how to live this life. That's it. That's the prerequisite. Am I gonna be a serious student of Jesus? Meaning, is he the only one that has the words of life or not? And if he's the only one that has the words of life, where else would I find myself but at the feet of my teacher? You with me? Are you a serious student of Jesus? Is he your friend? I want us to sit in that a little bit. I don't want to go on to all the things we're going to do until we really churn through that question. Am I a serious student? Because the strategy is for the whole of our lives to be given to being his student. If you want to deal with God in prayer up here and you just need as a step of obedience, and let me just say, sometimes God requires for us to physically move our bodies in response to him, and that's all wrapped up in obedience. And if that's true with you, if part of your response to God this morning is to physically get out of your row and come up here and put your face down, look at me, do that. If you need to pray with somebody or work this out a little more with somebody, we're gonna have staff that are out here, out these double doors. You're welcome to come out into these double doors and pray with somebody. Are we serious students of Jesus? Holy Spirit, our desire is to be the kind of church that we've described. We wanna be a place where all people can discover and follow Jesus right where they are and wherever they're sent. The hard part of this is that you're asking of us the whole of our lives. Help us to realize this morning that there is nothing better and there is no safer place for me than in total surrender to you. Holy Spirit, deal with each one of us